The third set is attentional deployment. Now, attentional deployment is our kind of spotlight. It's where do you put your spotlight of attention when it comes to this. Now, we all have this ability to focus on different things. Typically, we're hardwired to focus on two things. We're focusing on signals of danger or threat to things that we value, or we're focused on signals that promote joy of things that we value. Okay? Attention and value are tied. You don't usually pay attention to things we don't care about. Right? There's some value, there's some aspect that we value in there. So an issue here is that sometimes people struggle. I can shift my attention relatively well from one thing to another and then back again, back and forth and all over the place. But if you're hardwired to perseverate, not ruminate, if you're hardwired to perseverate, then you're going to be more likely to get stuck on those negatives. Because it's natural to focus on negatives because it's part of our defense mechanism. Okay? It's a strategy. It's the problem. So what is rumination? Rumination is a perseveration on the negative without an attempt to problem solve. If you're focused on something negative, yet at the same time you're trying to do something about it, that's really not rumination. That's called active problem solving. You're just struggling with the problem solving component. But people with autism who highly perseverate also tend to highly ruminate, where they focus and that's all they do until they become more depressed or more anxious, right, and more angry and so on. So what we have to practice here is a few things. One is that focus is not just about focusing on the outside world. Now with the dentist, you could choose to focus on the sounds in the room, right? The sound of the drill, or the sound of the person screaming who's in the chair right now, right? Or the sounds of the phone. You could also instead focus on Jerry Springer, who's getting like played on the TV screen that the dentist was nice enough to put on there for you to distract you, right? Or you could focus internally on none of that and instead focus on your physical clues or on your own thoughts or on the last vacation you went to. You can shift your focus to more healthy ways than not. But one thing that's important to be aware is how strong are we at focusing on our emotional cues? How aware are we of that? Do we overly focus on negative emotional clues or negative emotional or physical states? Or can we shift from that emotion? Often people with autism get stuck on focusing on negative emotions when they're happening. And because of that, that just drives the cycle of physiological symptoms back to negative emotions, and around we go. You or I, we can get pissed off at something. Somebody with autism could too. But you get angry at something, and you can quickly distract yourself from that. You can move away from that, and then come back, but move away. It's not the ignoring that matters, it's the shifting that matters. It's giving yourself these back and forths that really matter, empowering yourself to do it, and because eventually you can put that under voluntary control. You can actually have control over your attentional states. Okay? But if somebody tends to ruminate, if somebody is unable to have voluntary control over their attention, they're more likely to get stuck with maladaptive attentional deployment. You can practice, how do you do this with somebody with autism? You can practice shifting and distraction strategies with slightly more, starting with quite neutral kind of situations to more distressing situations, thinking about those things, and then practicing shifting. Shifting to what? I don't care. Shifting is what matters. But you could shift to the soles of your feet, like mindfulness does. Or you can shift to them actually thinking about something positive that they perseverate on, like Pokemon. And then shift back. The thing is, though, not just to stay there. The whole point is to then shift back to the thing that's distressing. And then to shift back to the thing that's not. Okay? Because we don't want it to serve an escape function, an avoidance function. We want this to be an empowering skill that they can use under their control. Okay? So it's the back and forth that really matters. There's just two more steps in kind of this process. Let's say you've tried all this in the dentist chair. You've been watching Jerry Springer. You're trying to ignore the sound of the drill, but it's loud, it's there, you're hearing it. You smell that kind of smell of the dentist smell. You know what I'm talking about, right? And kind of fluoride kind of in the air. Kind of you smell all that, it's there. You can't not pay attention to it now. You're feeling anxious again. The dentist comes into the room. She's about to start work on you. You have ability to control your thoughts in the moment. You could either think quite maladaptive things, right? You could be very concrete in your thinking, very rigid, all or nothing kind of approaches, all those cognitive distortions that we'll talk about tomorrow, right? The common ones that are common in autism, like all or nothing and catastrophic thinking. And you could say, this is going to be the worst pain in the world. This is going to last forever. This person is incompetent, et cetera, et cetera. They don't care about me. Or you could have more adaptive kind of thoughts about it. You can also have a tendency to think in ways that fit with your mood. Right, this mood congruence, which is very common in anxiety disorders, and we know in the autism literature, even more common in people with autism than in people who don't. So that is emotionally driven behaviors and emotionally driven thinking. Right, is a very common reaction for people on the spectrum. So ask yourself, how do you get at this? How do you get at what somebody else in terms of their abilities are around cognitive control? Ask yourself, what is this person's self-statements like? What kind of way do they describe things? When they're put in situations, what scripts come out of their mouths? What do they use? It might not be actually content related, but the themes might be very telling, right? Like, they might be in the dentist chair, but they're not actually having statements about the dentist, but they could be having quite negative content statements about darkness, for example, and themes of darkness. But they only come out in situations of anxiety, right? Themes of harm, right? You know, like things like that. So what kind of self-statements? They could also just be very catastrophic. I know many people who I see in my private practice who engage very easily in statements like, this was the worst it could have ever been. I can't believe, I can never, just absolutely, you don't even understand. You've never been in a situation like me before. It's just, there's nothing I could do ever about this. They're just horrible. You don't understand this. They don't listen, etc. Right? So there's a lot of self-statements in there that I can pull from to get a sense of what their approach is to distressing situations. This is where that idea of schema comes in. What are their views like of other people? What have they developmentally learned through their experiences with their caregivers, authority figures, peers? Now that you know them, what do you think their rule is about others? Do they carry with them a rule that other people are uncaring? Do you think they carry with them a rule that people are dangerous, that people don't like me, right? People wish me harm. Not that they'll ever say that to you, but you have to use your detective skills and your experiences of what their interpersonal development has been like. Right? How do they see their current context? How do they describe and how do their family members describe their current contexts? There's many things we can do depending on the kinds of distortions that you notice. Typically, one of the best ones, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, are addressing things like teaching gradients. So the whole point of the emotional scales, like the incredible 5-point scale, not so incredible, or these other kind of things, all of these things are about helping to teach gradients, moving from this catastrophe all or nothing to other approaches to seeing our own experience, right? You can teach very clear scripts of coping strategies, right? So you don't have to teach very kind of detailed mind over mood attempts at, cognitive restructuring based on collecting the evidence, positive and negative. If you can, fantastic. Again, we'll explore those things tomorrow. But at the very least, you could teach them scripts that are positive in nature, that are coping in nature, that help them sit in that situation in a more functional way. And yes, you can collect positive evidence. I've given kids cameras before, and they've gone out taking pictures of their situations that bother them, right? But I don't say, take pictures when you're anxious. I say, take pictures of your class, right? Take pictures of the dentist's office. Go there and take pictures of it, and so on, right? And then you develop them, and you will, by definition, find a whole bunch of negatives in there, negative pictures in there. But you'll also find a bunch of positives. Right? But when you're talking with them in the moment and they're anxious, you don't see the positives. So it's a wonderful way of putting concrete, hey, tell me more about this one. Let's go into this more. And you start to build on the positives in that way. There's many different ways of exploring this and collecting it. The last step, and then we'll take a break, right? It's break time after that, yeah? Okay, is response modulation. This is the one everybody's familiar with. This is how we regulate the arousal after we're super distressed. This is, you've been in the dentist chair, they're actually working on you, your heart's beating a lot, you're incredibly anxious. Now what are you going to do? Cognitive things are only going to help you so far, right? Attentional deployment, not going to work anymore because there's actually distress coming into your mouth, okay? And this is why it's important to be careful when we ask people, when they're already stressed out, already upset, to do things like practice your breathing. Practice your breathing. That was very useful to stay calm before you hit this point so that you could be in distressing situations, right? Think good thoughts. Up yours, I'm not going to think good thoughts. I'm completely angry right now. The only thoughts I have are angry thoughts, right? So what do we do in these kinds of situations? Okay? We have to move somebody from, first of all, an inability to express themselves in pro-social ways to express that negative emotion in a more pro-social manner. We want to actually not suppress the emotion at this point, but empower somebody to have the skills to show people in a healthy way that they're feeling this emotion. That's a different step, right? That's a step to the left in terms of what we do to modulate responses. It's not catharsis. We're not just saying, get it out, get it all out, break as much as you want here. Right? We can teach people in adaptive ways. We can actually teach, forget about that level of independence, fixed response patterns when they hit a fire engine red. When they're super in crisis, we can just teach them, these are the 3 steps of what you do. Right? Show the card, take a breath, walk outside. Now, you have to work with the environment to do that, but I'm trying to show you that we're empowered to use these skills regardless of developmental level. Can the person self-soothe? What is that person self-soothing like? What kind of behaviors do they use to self-soothe? That's a really important component of trying to build up response modulation skills. Where are they currently at in terms of their self-soothing? You don't want them to rely on you for self-soothing. By definition, self-soothing is something that they can generate. Maybe they self-soothe by, I can't even say that word, by hand flapping, by some of their perseverations. Good, okay? So the last thing I'll show you is, these are the ones, the last thing I wanted to share with you are many of the things that we can do. Teaching alternative behaviors to the emotionally driven response, that's what the EDR stands for. Exploring kind of pros of their reactions first and then cons, that's a really important one. So regardless of the emotion, the first thing I often do in cognitive behavior therapy with these guys when I'm working with them is ask them, why is that working for you? And I'm not asking it even in a Socratic way. I'm actually legitimately interested in how X and Y, what I think of as maladaptive patterns, are helpful. Because they've already heard a lot. They've already been punished a lot, typically, for their emotionally driven behaviors. So I want to get rid of that. And I want to say, with the angry responses that they have, you're doing X and Y. So tell me, how does that help you? And I give them examples. Do people stay away from you afterwards? Do they give you some space? Yeah, they do. Start with the positive. Start with the good of what those emotions are. Then look at the cons. Don't just go right to all the negatives, okay? And the relaxation activities, right? All those relaxation activities, deep breathing, relaxed breathing, a mantra, picturing a visual like a balloon, all of those are important to practice for before somebody hits high levels of distress. And you have to practice it so that it becomes automatic. If you have to tell somebody to do their breathing beyond a very specific prompt, it's not yet automatic, okay? And it's not going to work in high levels of distress. It requires a considerable degree of over-practice across many different situations, both not neutral as well as mildly distressing, before they'll be able to use that in a high level of distress. So it's not a simple thing to do, kind of to teach in that way. It's simple to teach so that they can go into mild situations and stay calm and feel empowered. But if they're at a high crisis level, it has to be automatic to begin with.